You won't even be alive when I graduate." That's what my granddaughter said to me. No hesitation, no blink, just a shrug, a giggle, and a sip from her overpriced iced coffee. The sentence hung in the air like cigarette smoke, clinging to my skin, my breath, my bones. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands were in the sink, water running, dishes half rinsed. I just stood there with a sponge in my palm, watching the suds slide down the plates, listening to her footsteps vanish down the hallway, and something inside me, something old, something tired, went very, very still. That night, I didn't sleep. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. I could hear the hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of the floorboards upstairs. My daughter, Ellen, always walked like she was angry at the floor. And Clara, well, Clara was 17 and knew everything. She slammed doors, shouted into her phone, laughed too loud at things that weren't funny. She used to braid my hair when she was little. Now she barely looked me in the eye. I lay on my back in the guest room, which used to be the laundry room before they converted it. It smelled faintly of detergent and cat litter, even though they didn't have a cat. The walls were thin. I could hear the TV from the living room, some crime show, low and murmuring. I stared at the ceiling, at the crack above the fan, and thought of all the things I didn't say. I didn't remind Clara that I was the one who set up her college fund, that after my husband died, I put half of our savings into a trust with her name on it. I didn't tell her how I used to clip coupons, skip haircuts, sew the hems of my own slacks, just so I wouldn't have to touch that account. I didn't say that the only reason she would ever see a graduation stage was because I had chosen her future over my present. I didn't say any of that, because I was raised to keep things quiet, to carry pain like groceries, 2 bags in each hand, no help, don't drop a single egg. But something shifted that night, a kind of silence that wasn't surrender. I got out of bed around 4 in the morning, boiled water for tea, and sat by the window with the mug warming my hands. The city was still. A light fog pressed against the glass like a secret. I took out the old file folder from the drawer beside the bed. It was cream-coloured, a little bent at the corners. Inside, everything was in order. Copies of the trust documents, bank statements, contact info for the financial advisor. I read each line slowly, letting the words settle like dust on my lap. Clara Elizabeth Morgan, beneficiary, Ida Ruth Grayson, grantor, me. I stared at my name until the letters blurred. The money wasn't hers. Not yet. Not legally. Not morally. And maybe, after what she said, not ever. I didn't feel angry. That was the strangest part. No rage, no tears, just a quiet knowing, like stepping onto solid ground after drifting for too long. I closed the folder, took a deep breath, and decided I was going to Paris. Not someday. Not maybe next year. Not when it makes sense. I was 74 years old, and I had waited long enough. I had never been, not even when Harold was alive. We always said we'd go for our 40th anniversary, but then his blood pressure started climbing, and the plumbing needed fixing, and then the grandbabies came, and suddenly Paris became a postcard on the fridge. Then Harold died, and I let the dream go quiet, folded it up like his funeral suit and tucked it in a drawer. But it had never really died. That morning, I poured myself a second cup of tea, opened my laptop, and began looking at flights. The screen glowed soft in the dim room. April was still low season. Prices weren't terrible. I found one, non-stop from JFK to Charles de Gaulle, $798. I clicked, hold. The kettle clicked off behind me. The sun hadn't risen yet. My hands didn't shake. I emailed the financial advisor before breakfast. The subject line was simple: amendment to trust. I didn't tell Ellen. I didn't tell Clara. Not yet. I knew what they'd say. That I was being emotional. That I was overreacting. That kids say things they don't mean. But she meant it. She said it like I was already a gravestone. So I made a promise to myself right there at the kitchen table, while the house still slept. I would not die quietly. And I would not die in this house. The trust was never meant to be a prize. It was a gift, quiet, considered, and stitched together from sacrifice. Harold and I had no wealth to pass down, no stocks or vacation cabins or rare coins in velvet boxes. But we had that account. After he passed, I sat with a man named Richard Evans at a walnut desk and whispered, "I want to put something away for Clara, for her future." He nodded like he'd heard it 1,000 times. Maybe he had. But it was new to me. He explained tax deferments, compound interest, withdrawal penalties. I didn't care about any of that. I just knew I wanted her to have options. A runway. Something I never had. Harold and I had scraped by, 2 jobs each, some months. I once cleaned houses for women half my age with handbags worth more than my car. But we always managed. When Clara was born, our only grandchild, I looked at her pink face and thought, she won't struggle like we did. And so I opened the account. Every birthday card, every tax return, every bit of Harold's pension I didn't need, I funneled it into that trust. Over the years it grew, not fast, not impressively, but steadily, like a faithful plant that blooms only when no one's watching. Ellen knew, of course. She sat beside me at the bank, nodded as I signed the papers. "You're really doing this?" she asked. "It's all for her?" I had smiled, proud, a little scared. She deserves it. And for a while it felt right. Clara was a sweet girl then, curious, bright, always scribbling things into a little green notebook. She wanted to be a marine biologist one year, then an artist the next. I didn't care what she became. I just wanted her to feel like the world wasn't closed to her. I used to take her on walks when Ellen had long shifts. We'd count birds, make up stories about squirrels, stop for lemon ices. She'd grip my hand so tight, like I was a balloon she was afraid to let go. "Grandma, when I grow up, you'll live with me, okay?" Funny how children mean those things when they say them. They really do. But then time comes like a river, and they forget. By the time Clara turned 15, things had shifted. She stopped hugging me in public, rolled her eyes when I reminded her to say thank you, stopped coming into my room to ask about the photo albums. I told myself it was adolescence, hormones, the inevitable untethering. But when she made that comment, that I wouldn't even be alive, I understood something deeper. She didn't just see me as old. She saw me as expired. And yet, despite all that, I still wrestled with guilt. Sitting there in the guest room, looking at the trust paperwork, I wondered if I was being cruel, vindictive. I imagined Ellen's face when she found out. Shocked. Hurt. I pictured Clara crying, maybe slamming her bedroom door, yelling about betrayal. But then I thought of my own sacrifices, the missed trips, the worn-out shoes, the birthdays I spent alone because they were too busy. I thought of every time I bit my tongue when Clara snapped, when Ellen minimized, when no one said thank you for dinner. And I remembered something Harold once said, after a hard day at work, when his back ached and his fingers were stained with engine grease. If we don't stand up for ourselves, they'll build their whole lives on our silence. I had stood silent long enough. I didn't want revenge. I wasn't looking to punish anyone. But I had one life. One. And I wasn't going to die knowing I had paid for someone else's freedom while chaining myself to their convenience. So I called Richard Evans. He answered on the 3rd ring. Mrs. Grayson? It's been a while. Yes, I said. My voice was calm. I need to amend the trust. He didn't ask why. Professionals like him don't. He just said, "We'll need a written directive. I can send you the forms." "Thank you, Richard," I said. "And Richard?" "Yes?" "Make sure it's clear. The funds are to be released in full. To me. Immediately." There was a pause. Then, "Understood." After we hung up, I made a list in my notebook. Not of regrets, but of possibilities. Walk along the Seine, eat pain au chocolat, no guilt, ride the carousel in Montmartre, drink wine at lunch, speak broken French with pride. It felt foolish, childish even. I hadn't travelled abroad in my life. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know how to navigate airports anymore, not really. But I remembered that green notebook Clara used to carry, how she used to write down dreams like they were facts. And I thought, if she had the right to dream at 16, didn't I still have it at 74? I went online, booked a small hotel near the Latin Quarter. It had mixed reviews. "Charming but noisy," one person wrote. "Old world feel, tiny elevator." That sounded perfect. I printed the confirmation, folded it into the folder beside the trust papers. Then I went to the closet and took out the suitcase I hadn't used in a decade. It still smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. I unzipped it, just to see if it still worked. It did. When Harold died, the house got too quiet too quickly. He passed on a Thursday morning, with the TV still on low in the background and my hand in his. It was gentle, almost polite. He'd been sick a long time, the kind of sickness that doesn't surprise you when it finally finishes what it started. Still, when the hospice nurse nodded and touched my shoulder, I remember thinking, now what? The house echoed. Everything echoed. The fridge hum, the creak of the hallway floor, the tick of the clock we bought in 1972. Even my own breathing sounded too loud. Ellen came that weekend. She stayed overnight, helped with the paperwork, made phone calls. I couldn't. "You can't stay here alone, Mom," she said. "It's too much house for you now." I looked around. She wasn't wrong. It was too much. Too many rooms for one person. Too many reminders. But I wasn't ready to leave. Still, 3 months later, after the casseroles stopped coming and the silence settled into my bones like cold, I packed a few boxes and moved into Ellen's place. "Just until you feel more like yourself," she said. "We'll make space. It'll be good for all of us." I believed her. She and Mark had just bought a 3-bedroom in a suburb with trimmed hedges and tidy lawns. Clara had the biggest room, painted lilac with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. My space was the converted laundry room at the back of the house. They called it the guest suite. It had a twin bed, a shelf, and one narrow window that looked out onto the fence. You couldn't open it. Not really, but it let in light during the day. At first it wasn't bad. I helped with dinner, folded towels, waited at the door when Clara came home from school. I wasn't lonely, not exactly. Just peripheral, not quite in the room, not quite outside of it. Then came the small shifts, the old recliner I brought from the house. Too bulky for the living room. It went to the garage. My recipe books. "Too many, Mum." They stayed in a box beneath my bed. The photo of Harold the I kept on the end table. Moved temporarily because it clashed with the colour scheme. I tried not to mind. I told myself it was normal. Ellen had a family, a rhythm, a life. I was an addition. Not an intrusion, surely, but not central either. Then came the rules. No garlic in the pan. It lingered. No running the washer after 9 p.m. No visitors without checking first. No more watering the front flower bed. Clara says the hose is loud during her online classes. I adapted. That's what I'd always done. I kept to myself, ate quietly, watched the same 3 DVDs on an old portable player so I wouldn't disturb the TV room. My world shrank to a handful of rooms and a handful of tasks: chop, stir, wipe, fold. Still, I told myself I was lucky. I had a roof, a family, a place at the table, until I didn't. One evening, a few months before the comment that broke everything, I came out to the kitchen with a pie I'd baked. Cherry, Clara's favourite, or at least it used to be. She was sitting at the island with 2 friends, laughing into her phone, earbuds in. I smiled, said softly, "Pie's still warm if you'd like a slice." One of the girls leaned over to Clara and asked, "Is that your grandma?" Clara, without missing a beat, rolled her eyes and said, "Yeah, she just lives here, like furniture." The girls laughed, not cruelly, just easily. I stood still, pie dish in hand. Something about the weight of it, the smell of cinnamon, the way no one looked me in the eye. It all pressed into my ribs until I couldn't breathe. I didn't say anything. I just set the pie down and went back to my room. Later that night, Ellen knocked on my door. "You okay, Mom?" I nodded. "She didn't mean it." I nodded again. "She's just being a teenager." That's when I looked at Ellen. Really looked. Her face was tight, her eyes distant. She wasn't there to comfort me. She was there to keep the peace. And I thought, so this is how it happens. Not with screaming, not with locked doors, but with soft dismissals. With the slow erasing of who you were, until you're just a shadow at the edge of the frame. The pie was still untouched the next morning. I threw it away. By the time the holidays rolled around, I was barely using the living room. It had started slowly. A comment here, a sideways glance there. "Oh, Mom, do you mind turning the volume down? Could you not sit in that chair when Mark's working from home? We're trying to keep this space more open, you know." I knew. I started staying in my room more. At first it was practical. Fewer steps, fewer chances to be in the way. Then it became routine. I'd wake early, make the coffee, unload the dishwasher before anyone else stirred. Then I'd retreat. I'd wait until the house emptied before folding laundry in the living room or running the vacuum. My life became a sequence of absences. They never said, "Don't sit with us," but the message was there, soft and constant. Mark had his office set up in the den. Clara sprawled across the couch with her laptop, headphones clamped over her ears, her legs kicking into the air as she typed and chewed gum. Ellen took conference calls at the kitchen table. No one said, "Come join us." So I didn't. Instead, I learned how to disappear. I ate breakfast in my room. A piece of toast, usually cold. Lunch was leftovers, eaten quietly after they'd already cleared out. I cleaned up after them without asking. I made myself small. I watched the rhythms of a family that no longer needed me, like someone peering into a house from the street, coat zipped, breath fogging the glass. There was one chair they hadn't taken, a creaky metal one by the window in my room. I kept a cushion on it and sat there most afternoons, knitting half-finished scarves no one asked for. Sometimes I listened to audiobooks with one earbud in. Mostly I just sat, hands still, letting the light move across the wall until it faded. I began to notice things I hadn't before. The way Clara never said thank you anymore. The way Ellen's voice got sharp when she spoke to me, even when she thought she was being kind. The way Mark never once asked me a real question, never looked up from his phone during dinner unless it was to comment on the news. And I began to understand something. This wasn't temporary. I wasn't just staying for now. I had become permanent background, tolerated, but unacknowledged. It was my own fault, in a way. I had let it happen. I had said yes too many times, apologized for things I didn't do, stayed silent when I should have spoken. And when you spend long enough folding yourself into corners, people forget you were ever meant to take up space. I started writing things down in a little notebook. Not memories, not really. Just small things. Observations. Reminders. Mark asked where the salt was. I've kept it in the same place since August. Clara left dishes in the sink again. Ellen said nothing. Dinner was chicken. No one asked if I was eating. They weren't accusations, just notes, just evidence. Because when you're constantly erased, even your own experience begins to feel suspect. I needed proof that I was still seeing clearly. Then came New Year's Eve. They didn't tell me they were hosting. I found out when the doorbell rang and voices spilled into the hallway. Clara's friends arrived first, all glossy hair and perfume clouds. Mark's co-workers followed, bringing wine and noise. Ellen lit candles and dimmed the lights. I stood in the hallway, holding a platter of deviled eggs, invisible. "Is that your grandmother?" someone asked Clara. Clara laughed. "She just kind of floats around. You get used to it." I turned, went back to my room, closed the door. At midnight, I heard the countdown. Glasses clinked, people kissed. Someone played a song I didn't know. I lay in bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. At 12:07, Clara knocked on my door, tipsy and flushed. "Happy New Year, Grandma," she said, tossing me a weak smile. "Did you, want a drink or something?" I shook my head. She shrugged. "Suit yourself," she said, and vanished back into the party. When I closed my eyes that night, I knew. I wouldn't see another New Year in that house. I wouldn't spend one more season watching myself fade. It was a Saturday afternoon when it finally tipped. One of those bright, lazy days when the air smells like laundry detergent and distant barbecue smoke. I had just finished folding towels and was bringing out a plate of cookies. Fresh from the oven, still warm. My mother's recipe. The kind that holds together but melts in your mouth. Clara was in the backyard with 3 of her friends. They'd dragged out cushions, tangled themselves in blankets, and were sipping something in plastic tumblers that definitely wasn't lemonade. Their laughter was sharp, high-pitched, the kind that rises a little too easily. I slid open the back door, stepping carefully. "Girls," I said, soft but clear. "I made cookies, if anyone wants." They looked up. One of the girls, dark hair, perfect skin, smiled with her mouth, but not her eyes. "Oh, thanks," she said, reaching for one out of politeness. Another one, the tall one with the messy bun and oversized sunglasses, elbowed Clara. "Your grandma's so sweet," she said, biting into the cookie. Clara didn't respond at first. She took a slow sip of her drink, legs stretched out like she owned the patio. Then, with a careless flick of her hand, she said, "She just kind of hovers, like part of the furniture. Harmless, but always there." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel. That would have been easier. It was light, harmless. The kind of laughter people use when they don't think anyone's listening. But I was. I stood there, tray in hand, feeling the warmth of the cookies seep into my palms, even as the blood drained from my face. Harmless. Furniture. Always there. I didn't speak. I didn't make a sound. I just nodded once, like I'd heard the weather report, and turned around, walked back inside, set the tray on the counter. My hands were steady, not because I was calm, but because I'd practiced steadiness my entire life. Ellen came in later, the door slamming harder than necessary. She didn't see me at first. "Mom?" she called. "Did you take my charger?" I didn't answer. She found me in the kitchen, rinsing a plate. "Oh," she said, mildly surprised. "Did you hear Clara and her friends? They're just being silly. You know how teenagers are." I said nothing, just ran the sponge over the porcelain, slow and even. Ellen sighed. "Don't take everything so seriously, okay?" I turned the faucet off, looked at her, really looked. "You know," I said, my voice even, "it's funny how often you all explain away bad behavior as silly or nothing. But I remember when you were Clara's age, and if you'd ever called your grandmother harmless furniture, I would have washed your mouth out with soap." Ellen blinked, then scoffed, like I'd said something quaint. "It's a different time, Mom." "Is it?" I asked. "Or is it just a time where no one bothers to correct cruelty anymore?" She didn't answer, just left the room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the word in my head, harmless, and thinking about how many ways that word had been used against women like me. Harmless, like useless. Harmless, like invisible. Harmless, like already gone. I thought about my life. Not in big sweeping scenes, but in ordinary fragments. The years I worked in the school cafeteria so Ellen could have piano lessons. The late nights Harold and I spent fixing up that little house one room at a time. The way I learned to make soup stretch for days when money got tight. The birthdays, the holidays, the Christmas Eve when I stayed up till 3 sewing Clara's costume because she changed her mind last minute. All of it, quiet, unnoticed, background. And now, I was furniture. I got out of bed around 3 a.m., pulled on a sweater, and went to the dining room. The folder with the trust documents was still tucked in my nightstand, but I brought it out and placed it on the table like a guest I was finally ready to face. I stared at Clara's name on the front page. Then I opened the browser on my phone, scrolled back to the hotel booking I'd saved. The one in Paris, with the blue shutters and the tiny balcony, still available. I clicked reserve. I couldn't tell you when the dream of Paris first took root. It wasn't from a movie or a postcard or some grand romance in a book. It was quieter than that. Smaller. I think it started the day I saw a black and white photo in a used bookstore. The Eiffel Tower in the background. A woman in a wide skirt feeding pigeons. She was laughing. You could see it, even without sound. I remember thinking, she looks free. I cut that photo out and slipped it between the pages of my cookbook. Left it there for years, through moves and marriage and motherhood, through rain leaks and utility bills and colds that turned into flus that turned into something deeper. I never framed it, never taped it to the fridge, just kept it close, like a secret too delicate to speak aloud. Harold knew. He always knew. "Someday," he'd say, brushing crumbs from the table, "we'll sit by the Seine and eat overpriced croissants. You'll wear that ridiculous red scarf you never let me donate." I would laugh and say, "We'll go when we're older, when things calm down." But things never calm down. They just shift shape. They turn into aging parents and broken cars and children with braces and college applications. Then they become hospital bills and empty chairs. And someday becomes a box in the attic labeled maybe later. I never thought it was bitterness. I never envied women who travelled or posted smiling pictures under foreign skies. I just thought, that's not for me. I wasn't angry. I was resigned. Until Clara called me harmless. Until Ellen shrugged and said, "They're just being silly." And suddenly, I was tired of being the kind of woman who didn't let herself want things. So I sat at that table in the dark, the folder open beside me, and I whispered, "I want this." Not to prove anything, not to punish anyone, just to see a street I've never walked. Just to breathe air that smells like bread and perfume and wet stone. just to feel, even for a week, like the woman in that photograph. I started making lists the next morning. Not the kind I used to make. Not grocery lists or reminder calls or insurance appointments. These were selfish lists, beautiful ones. Things I'll pack. One red scarf. My comfortable shoes, even if they're ugly. A copy of Madame Bovary I never finished. Lipstick, even though I hardly wear it anymore. My reading glasses, both pairs, in case one breaks. Things I want to try. Ordering coffee in French, getting lost on purpose, sitting in a museum without checking the time, smiling at someone without apologizing for my teeth, not explaining myself to anyone. I didn't tell Ellen or Clara, not yet. Some things deserve the dignity of silence before the storm. Instead, I called the bank, confirmed the withdrawal request with Mr. Evans. He didn't flinch when I said, "I've changed my mind about the trust." Just asked for my address so he could mail the papers. I signed them 2 days later. My name, Ida R. Grayson, steady and unashamed, in blue ink. The money came through the next week. Not all of it. I left a small portion, enough for Clara to take a summer course or buy textbooks if she wanted. I wasn't spiteful. I was just done financing people who treated me like wallpaper. I booked the flight, paid in full, window seat. Then I walked to the corner drugstore and bought a new journal. The cover was soft, green, embossed with gold leaves. I pressed it to my chest for a moment before putting it in the basket. I didn't know what I'd write in it yet, but I knew I'd fill it. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the carpet, I took out the photograph from the cookbook, the one of the woman and the birds. It was yellowed now, frayed at the edges, but the smile was still there, defiant, bright, real. I tucked it into the new journal. Then I sat by the window in my room, watching the porch light flicker on, and for the first time in years, I smiled without anyone else in the room. It was Ellen's idea to host dinner that Sunday. "Just us," she said. "A little reset after a long week." She said it like an invitation, but I knew better. It was a command dressed up in courtesy. Mark had grilled salmon. Clara made a salad, though most of it came from a bag. I set the table, quietly, as always. The candles were lit, for ambiance. Ellen liked ambiance. She once said she couldn't relax unless the house smelled like sandalwood and looked like a Pottery Barn catalogue. So I lit the candles, folded the napkins, even pulled out the real glasses, the ones she only used when guests came. Funny. I wasn't a guest, but I was never quite family either. We sat down at 6:05, Ellen on one end, Mark on the other. Clara slouched next to her phone, scrolling between bites. I sat across from her, hands folded neatly on my lap. The meal started normally. Comments about the weather. Mark grumbling about gas prices. Clara talking about a friend's boyfriend who wasn't even hot but acted like he was. Ellen laughed, sipping her wine. Then, between the second helping of potatoes and the opening of a new bottle, it happened. Mark looked at Clara and said, "You still thinking about UCLA?" Clara shrugged. "I mean, maybe. I don't even know anymore." Ellen jumped in. "We'll make it work. Between the scholarships and what Mom's set aside, we'll figure it out." And then Clara, without lifting her eyes from her phone, said, "She'll probably be dead before I graduate anyway." Just like that. Like it was a joke. Like it was weather. The room froze for a beat too long. Ellen let out a thin laugh. "Clara!" But Clara didn't flinch. She just popped a cherry tomato in her mouth and chewed like nothing had happened. Mark chuckled under his breath. "Morbid, kid." I stared at my plate. I didn't trust my voice. No one apologized. No one corrected her. No one looked at me. I excused myself, quietly, politely, as I had been trained to do my whole life. I went to the kitchen, closed the door, pressed my hands to the counter and let the silence wash over me. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was something colder, heavier, a kind of final clarity. She had said it like I was already gone, and Ellen had let her. Later, when they were finishing dessert, I came back in to clear the plates. Ellen looked up. "Mum, don't. We've got it." But I took them anyway, one by one, steady, measured. I rinsed them under warm water, careful not to splash. I wiped down the counter. I straightened the chairs. No one said thank you. Clara left her napkin balled on the floor. I picked it up. At 10:12 p.m., I returned to my room. I closed the door, locked it gently, and sat on the edge of the bed. Then I opened my green journal and wrote down every word from that dinner. Every silence. Every expression. Then I turned the page and wrote, "I'm going. Not in anger, in truth. I'm going to Paris. And I'm not coming back." I tried once more. It was 2 days after that dinner, and I thought, maybe it was a bad night. Maybe Ellen was tired. Maybe Clara's words hit her harder than she showed. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that before I could let go completely. So I made us tea. I waited until Clara had gone to school and Mark was in his office. The kitchen was quiet, sun spilling in through the blinds. I pulled down the good mugs, the ones with the blue stripes we'd bought together when Ellen first moved out. She used to love those mugs. She came down in her robe, hair still wet from the shower. "What's all this?" "I thought we could talk," I said. She sat, not reluctantly, but not warmly either. I poured the tea, set the sugar out, though she never used it anymore. She watched me like I was performing something unfamiliar. I sat across from her, folded my hands. "About Sunday." Ellen sipped. "What about it?" "What Clara said." She exhaled, long and thin. "Mum? She's a teenager. She said I'd be dead before she graduates. She didn't mean it. But she said it." Silence. I reached across the table, but not far enough to touch. "Ellen, do you remember when you were 12 and you broke your arm? I slept on the floor next to your bed for 3 nights. You had nightmares and didn't want to be alone." She didn't answer. "I remember everything you needed, even when you didn't ask. I remember every birthday cake, every school play, every time you forgot your lunch, and I drove it to you even if it made me late for work." "I know," she said quickly, almost annoyed. "I've said thank you." "You haven't," I said softly. "Not really. And that's not what I want. I don't need gratitude, but I need you to see me. Still." She looked down at her tea. I kept going. "I gave everything I had to you and to her. I poured myself out into this family, and now I'm being erased." "Mum, that's not fair." "Isn't it?" She bristled. "You live here rent-free. We feed you. You don't work. You don't—" "I don't work," I repeated, almost laughing. "I cooked every meal last week. I folded 3 loads of your laundry. I picked up Clara's dress from the tailor because she forgot. I cleaned your fridge. That's just helping." "No, Ellen. That's labor. That's contribution. And I'm tired of pretending it doesn't count." She leaned back, defensive now. "What do you want from me?" "I wanted you to say, that wasn't okay. I wanted you to look at your daughter and say, we don't speak to people like that. I wanted you to look at me and say, you matter. Even now. Even old. Even quiet." She said nothing. So I said the last thing I had left. "I'm leaving." Ellen blinked. "Leaving?" "I'm taking a trip. Soon." "What kind of trip?" Just a trip. Her mouth twisted. Do you think that's smart? You can barely walk through the airport without help. I smiled gently. Then I guess I'll find someone who helps. Where are you going? I shook my head. Does it matter? Her eyes narrowed. What about Clara's college fund? I met her gaze squarely. It was never hers. Not really. You said, I changed my mind. Because of one comment? No, I said. Because of 10 years of being tolerated, of being useful, but never welcome. She stood abruptly, chair legs screeching against the floor. You're being dramatic. I didn't flinch. Maybe. Or maybe I've just remembered what dignity feels like. She scoffed, turned, and walked away. The tea went cold on the table between us. I sat there a long time, listening to the house breathe around me. And then I got up, poured it down the sink, and started packing. The papers arrived on a Thursday, a thick envelope from the bank, addressed to me in neat, formal print. I waited until the house was empty. Ellen had taken Clara to a dentist appointment. Mark was at the office. Before I slit it open at the dining table, my hands didn't tremble, not anymore. Inside, the trust revocation forms, a summary of the withdrawal, and a confirmation of transfer. All funds were now in my personal account. There it was, in black and white. What I had spent years building, protecting, preserving, now returned fully to my name. Not Clara's, not Ellen's, mine. I sat with the papers for a while, not out of hesitation, out of reverence. It felt like holding a part of myself I hadn't seen in years, like discovering a photograph from before the lines on your face appeared. There was a line at the bottom. Client assumes full discretion over assets. I whispered it aloud. I assume full discretion. It wasn't just legal language. It was a statement of fact. I had the right. Not because I was angry, not because I was bitter, because I had given more than enough, and no one else got to decide what I owed now. The next step was simple. I went to my room and retrieved the folder from under my bed, the same one I'd carried to Ellen's house all those years ago, back when I thought I was just staying for a while. Inside were all the documents that still had my name on them. Harold's will, the original trust setup, birth certificates, marriage certificate, the deed to my old house, now sold. All of it in my handwriting, signed and filed, legal and living. I added the trust revocation to the front of the folder. Then I sat down at the small desk by the window and started a new list. Travel arrangements. Flight, confirmed. Hotel, confirmed. Passport, valid. Insurance, call tomorrow. Suitcase, needs cleaning. Notice to family, not required. That last one made me pause, but only for a second. They didn't deserve an announcement. Not after the way they had dismissed me, sidelined me, absorbed my labor without recognition. They would find out soon enough. The truth is, I didn't want to hurt them. I wasn't interested in revenge. I didn't want Ellen to cry, or Clara to scream, or Mark to raise his eyebrows and mutter about drama. I just wanted my life back, and I was done asking permission. That evening, Clara knocked on my door. I was reading. She didn't wait for me to answer. "Hey," she said, leaning in the doorway. "Do you still have that charger I let you borrow?" I set my book down. "No, Clara. I left it on the table yesterday." "Oh," she said, like it was my fault anyway. Then, "By the way, do you think you could take my dress to the dry cleaner this week? I need it for a thing." I looked at her. Really looked. She was beautiful, yes. Youth always is. But also distant, entitled, not cruel. Just untouched by the thought that other people's time was sacred too. "I won't be here," I said. She frowned. "Why?" I'm going on a trip. To where? Paris. She blinked, laughed. Wait, for real? Yes. She stared at me, as if trying to figure out whether I was joking. With who? Just me. Isn't that kind of dangerous? You're like old. I smiled. And you're like rude. She didn't laugh, just rolled her eyes and said, whatever, and disappeared down the hallway. I returned to my reading and didn't look up again. I packed on a Tuesday night while the house was asleep. The suitcase was smaller than I remembered. Soft-sided, navy blue, with a handle that stuck sometimes. I laid it open on the bed and moved slowly, carefully, as if each fold of fabric was a kind of prayer. 3 blouses, 1 pair of slacks, 1 good dress, in case I found myself somewhere nice. Comfortable shoes, well worn. A sweater Harold used to love on me. Soft grey with pearl buttons. I debated bringing the red scarf. Then I wrapped it around my shoulders for a moment and smiled. It still smelled like cedar. I packed it. Next came the papers. The folder, zipped into the inner pocket like a passport for more than just borders. My passport itself was buried in the file drawer. I'd renewed it 4 years ago, on a whim, thinking maybe I'd take a trip someday. Strange how the things you almost forget come back just when you need them. I took down the old camera from the shelf, wiped it with a cloth. The kind with buttons, not screens. I didn't want to experience Paris through a phone. I wanted to see it, to feel it. I left my room just before 4 a.m. The house was dark, save for the fridge light and the porch lamp outside. I had already printed my boarding pass. I had called for the taxi the night before, using a prepaid card so no one would see the charge. I didn't leave a note. No dramatic final words, no confessions, just silence, the kind that speaks clearly. I paused at the hallway mirror. My reflection looked tired, but not weak. My eyes, ringed with years, held something I hadn't seen in a long time. Something firm. Something still mine. I stepped outside. The air was crisp, tinged with dew and the faint sweetness of budding jasmine. The suitcase wheels clicked softly on the pavement as I moved toward the gate. The driver didn't say much, and I didn't need him to. I watched the streets pass like memory. Houses with sprinklers sputtering in the dark, newsstands not yet opened, windows glowing with early risers and bakers and janitors. At the airport, everything moved fast, like it always does. But I moved slow. I wasn't in a hurry, not anymore. Security was tedious. The young woman behind the counter asked if I needed help. I said no. My hands might be stiff, but they still knew what to do. At the gate, I sat near the window. The sun was beginning to climb. I sipped lukewarm coffee from a paper cup and let myself breathe. No one called, no texts, no missed calls. No one had noticed yet. It would take a few hours. Maybe Ellen would come to wake me and find the room empty. Maybe Clara would ask where her charger was, then realize I hadn't come back from errands. Maybe Mark wouldn't notice until dinner time, when no one had rinsed his glass. Maybe, for once, they'd feel the absence of what they assumed was permanent. Boarding was called row by row. I stood when mine was called, walked forward, steady. When I sat down in seat 17A and fastened the belt, I felt it. A small flutter. Not nerves. Not guilt. Something lighter. Something like freedom, but older. As the plane lifted from the ground, I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm still here." And I was. I landed just after noon. Paris greeted me with grey skies and the kind of cold that settles into your sleeves before you realize it. But it didn't matter. I was there. The wheels touched down. The plane slowed. and I pressed my palm to the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. The airport was busy, loud, disorienting. I moved slowly, following the signs with the little walking figures. I had practiced the French phrases on the plane, but when it came time to speak, I just nodded and pointed at my papers. The customs officer barely looked at me before stamping the passport and waving me through. The taxi stand smelled like diesel and wet concrete. I climbed into the back of a small red Peugeot with cracked leather seats and a driver who hummed along to a radio station playing American jazz. He didn't ask questions, just read the address from the slip of paper and pulled away from the curb. We drove through narrow streets, the buildings leaning close like old friends whispering. The sky hung low, and everything looked a little soft around the edges. I pressed my forehead to the window. Paris was not what I expected. It wasn't sparkling. It wasn't cinematic. It was real. Chipped paint, graffiti on the corners, laundry strung between windows. And it was beautiful. My hotel sat on a quiet street in the 5th arrondissement, tucked between a florist and a bookshop. The sign above the door read, Hôtel du Jardin, in peeling gold letters. The woman at the desk wore a thick cardigan and glasses on a chain. Her English was better than my French, which made us even. She handed me a brass key, not a card, a real key, and pointed to the elevator. Très petit, she warned, smiling. It was small, like standing in a closet with a coat rack. But it worked. It hummed and groaned its way up to the 4th floor. My room was at the end of a narrow hallway lined with faded wallpaper and light sconces shaped like tulips. The room itself was modest. A single bed with a floral quilt, a small desk, and a window with wooden shutters. I opened them, and there it was. Rooftops, chimneys, a strip of sky. I could hear the murmur of the street below. Footsteps, bicycle bells, the soft clink of plates from the cafe next door. I didn't unpack. I didn't need to. I just took off my shoes, sat on the edge of the bed, and let myself be. That evening, I wandered. No plan, no map. I pulled on my coat and red scarf and stepped out into the city like it belonged to me. The air was brisk, but not biting. The streets glowed, not from neon or grandeur, but from shop windows and little lamps that cast gold onto the cobblestones. I passed a bakery where a man was sweeping flour from the threshold. A group of teenagers laughed too loudly at something on a phone. A woman rode past me on a bicycle with a basket full of leeks and bread. No one looked twice at me. I wasn't out of place. I wasn't invisible. I was just another body moving through the quiet pulse of evening. I found a cafe by accident. Tiny tables. A chalkboard menu I couldn't fully read. I pointed to a word that looked like soup and said, "Un, s'il vous plaît?" The waiter nodded, brought me a bowl that smelled like garlic and thyme, and a slice of bread still warm at the center. I ate slowly, with both hands around the bowl. The wine was house red, cheap and perfect. When I paid, the waiter smiled at me, not politely but kindly. The kind of smile that says you belong here too. Back in my room, I lit the little bedside lamp and opened my green journal. I wrote, Day 1. I didn't get lost. I found things. Soup can be an act of worship. The city doesn't care who you used to be. Neither do I. By the 3rd day, I stopped checking the time. There was no schedule, no calendar marked with obligations. I woke when the light touched the curtain. I dressed slowly, like a woman with nowhere to be, and yet somehow everywhere to go. My knees ached when I stood, but they carried me farther each day. I wandered without intention. The city opened itself in small ways. A man playing accordion by the river, a child dropping a toy and laughing as it was rescued by a stranger. a woman in a green coat, standing in front of a painting for what must have been 20 full minutes, unmoving. I spent an afternoon in the Jardin du Luxembourg. The chairs were cold metal, and my hips complained. But I sat anyway. Children sailed toy boats in the fountain while their parents sipped coffee nearby. I watched a man sketch pigeons. He wasn't very good, but he looked peaceful. I wrote that in my journal. Peace doesn't require skill, only permission. I gave myself permission to stop apologizing for occupying space, to take the last croissant, to answer slowly when asked a question, to sit without offering to get up. One morning, I stood in front of a boulangerie window for 10 whole minutes before deciding to go in. I ordered a pain au chocolat. My French was clumsy, but I tried. The girl behind the counter smiled at me like I was brave, not foolish. I ate it, standing on the corner, flakes catching on my coat. It was warm and sweet, and so buttery I nearly cried. That night, I wrote, I have not felt indulgent in years. I didn't realize how tightly I'd clenched my fists until I unwrapped this pastry and found I still had room to receive something soft. I visited the bookstore beside the hotel. The owner was older than me, with wild grey hair and fingers stained with ink. He greeted me with a nod, nothing more, and let me wander the shelves. I found a book of poetry, French and English side by side, and bought it without thinking. He wrapped it in brown paper and twine. No barcode, no receipt, just trust. I tucked it into my coat like a secret. Later that day, on a bench near the Seine, I read one of the poems aloud under my breath. A man walking his dog passed me and smiled, not at me, but at the sound, like it was something good and familiar. I smiled back. That afternoon, I returned to the café from the first night. The waiter remembered me. Encore le vin rouge? He asked. I nodded. Et la soupe? He winked. Good choice. There was a young woman at the next table, typing furiously into her laptop, her coffee untouched. She reminded me of Clara, all sharp edges and urgency. At one point, she looked up, met my eyes, and said in halting English, You look like you're not in a rush. I said, I've waited 74 years. I don't rush anymore. She smiled. I hope I get there one day. I almost told her she would, if she let herself, but I didn't. Some things we have to learn alone. When I got back to the room, I turned on the small radio on the nightstand. It played a song I didn't recognize, soft and slow. I danced, just for a minute, just enough. And when I sat down to write that night, I didn't list what I saw. I wrote. I felt sunlight on my neck and didn't move away. I laughed out loud at pigeons fighting over breadcrumbs. I caught my reflection in a shop window and didn't look away. I saw myself, alive. The call came on a Thursday evening, just as I was about to go out. I had planned to walk to a nearby square where an old woman sold roasted chestnuts from a metal cart that hissed and smoked. I liked her. She reminded me of someone I used to be. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, the number unrecognized, but the area code unmistakable. I let it ring twice before I answered. Hello? A pause. Then Ellen's voice, small and tight. Mum? I didn't speak right away. I wasn't sure if this number would work. The woman at your hotel said you might be in your room. She was right, I said. More silence. You're really there? She asked. Yes. In Paris? Yes. I thought maybe, I don't know what I thought. I waited. I came into your room last week, she said. Everything was gone. I left quietly. You didn't leave a note. I didn't owe one. That landed heavy. I could hear it in the way her breathing changed. Not angry, just hit by the weight of truth. Clara's been asking, she said. She pretends she doesn't care, but she asks. She'll be fine. She said you hate us. I laughed quietly. No, I don't hate you. Then why? You wouldn't understand. Try me. I looked out the window. The street lamp below had just flickered on, casting light across the cobblestones. Because I was disappearing, I said, right in front of you. Because you all spoke around me, through me, past me. Because I folded towels and scrubbed pans and nobody remembered to say thank you. Because your daughter called me harmless furniture and you said nothing. Because I gave everything, and when I asked for dignity, I was told I was dramatic. Ellen didn't interrupt. I didn't leave to punish you, I continued. I left to find what's left of me. I didn't know, she whispered. You didn't ask. The line was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I'm sorry. The words were stiff, strange on her tongue, but they were real. I said nothing. I let them sit. I should have said something to Clara. I should have told her that wasn't okay. Yes, I said. I was just tired, I guess. So was I. She inhaled sharply. I don't know how to fix this. I didn't offer her a way out. Eventually, she asked, Are you coming back? I don't know. Will you call? Maybe. Another pause. Then, I miss you. I thought of the soup I'd eaten that afternoon, the way the waiter had winked when I mispronounced a word, the way the city had held me without asking me to explain myself. I miss who we used to be, I said. Then I added, But I don't miss that house. The line crackled. I hope you're safe, she said, quieter now. I am. I hope you're happy. I looked around the room, small, worn, humming with the quiet of a life that finally belonged to me. I'm not unhappy, I said, and that's more than I've had in a long time. We didn't say goodbye. We just let the silence take the weight. After she hung up, I put on my coat and tied the red scarf around my neck. The chestnut cart would still be there, and I still had things left to taste. On my last morning in Paris, I didn't rush. I woke with the light. Not the kind that blinds, but the kind that slips in gently, as if asking permission. I lay there a while, hand resting on my chest, listening to the distant clatter of someone opening shutters, the soft rumble of a cart being pulled across stone. I had no plans. I had done the museums, yes, though only the small ones. I'd wandered markets, bought cherries, smelled soap I didn't need. I'd written postcards I hadn't sent. I'd said bonjour and merci, and once, by accident, fromage when I meant formidable. No one laughed. Or maybe they did, kindly, behind their hands. It didn't matter. I dressed slowly, the red scarf first, then the sweater Harold loved. My steps were slower now. Travel will do that to old bones. But I moved with purpose, like someone who finally believed she was allowed to take up space. I walked to the river. There's a spot near Pont-Neuf where the stone wall is low enough to sit. I'd found it days earlier and kept it to myself. It wasn't marked on any tourist guide. No one sold keychains there. Just pigeons and old men with newspapers, and the Seine murmuring like a secret. I sat, took out my journal. It was nearly full now. Pages crowded with scribbles, receipts tucked between paragraphs, tiny pressed flowers losing their colour. I wrote, I was never harmless. I was just quiet. I was never furniture. I was the foundation. I am not a guest in my own life. Behind me, a boy threw a ball to his dog. A woman hummed as she passed. The city moved around me, unbothered by my age, my stories, my choices, and that was the grace of it. No one here looked at me and saw obligation. No one asked for proof of usefulness. I had become simply a woman. Later, I walked into a tiny shop that sold scarves and used books. I bought a silk square printed with tiny birds. The girl at the counter said, "C'est joli pour vous," and I believed her. Back at the hotel, I packed, carefully, as if each item held a new shape. I left the green journal on the bedside table. Someone would find it, maybe, read it, or maybe not. But I had written it, and that was enough. At the airport, I sat at the gate with a coffee that tasted nothing like the ones in the cafes. It didn't matter. I wasn't sad. I wasn't returning defeated. I wasn't going back to beg. I was going home to decide. On my own terms. Whether that meant a small apartment, or another trip, or maybe just a better chair by a better window, I didn't know. But it would be mine, and I would never again let myself become invisible just to be allowed. When they called my row, I stood, and I smiled, because I was not the woman who left. I was someone who returned. If you've ever felt like you were fading, like your usefulness was all you had, let this story sit with you, and when you're ready, do what Ida did. Choose yourself. If this moved you, share it. Or just whisper to someone who needs it. You are not furniture. You're still here.